Welcome back, everybody. This is Seed Wars number 19, and today we're going to take a look at some of the New Testament and try and really look at it from a perspective of the proto-evangelium, the seed of the woman versus the seed of the serpent. We're taking a literal perspective on those verses, that there is a literal serpent seed line, and I want to look at the New Testament through that particular lens to see if there is anything that can be gleaned. Now, before we look at that, some of you may be familiar with a news line that came out last week. Former head of Israel's space program says that the aliens asked not to be revealed because humanity is not yet ready. So we've got this professor that we see over here in the bottom right, 87-year-old man, an Israeli who's been working for the Israeli space program for many, many years, and he's in the know. And he recently did a meeting where he spoke about these UFOs. He even went so far as to say that Trump was on the verge of revealing the aliens to humanity, but these aliens in the Galactic Federation told Trump, hey, wait a second, let's let the people calm down first. We don't want any mass hysteria. Let's let everybody become, quote, sane before the big reveal. And so this is really fascinating because we've done quite a few lectures on this concept in the Days of Noah series. I've been trying to warn people for a long time that the level of deception on planet Earth is off the charts. These fallen angels are masquerading as extraterrestrials. They've been working with the different government leaders now for decades. There's been a plan in place for disclosure, and this disclosure of these extraterrestrials is in line with the great delusion of 2 Thessalonians 2. And if you haven't seen that, then I will include a link to in the description box of those particular lectures regarding the Galactic Federation of Light, and show you, it really goes into great detail about this coming delusion. And so I think it's really fascinating that right here and now we're seeing former head of Israel's space program talking about how President Trump was on the verge of spilling the beans, but the aliens told him to hang on. See, they're going to wait till the exact right moment when humanity is in desperate need of them. And then when the time is right, the trap will be sprung. And there'll be disclosure of these extraterrestrials. And there's no telling how it's all going to play out. But they're going to be made to look like they are looking out for us. That they care about the evolution of humanity. And they're going to be made to appear to be more righteous than us. And they're going to offer things from their civilization. They're going to offer technology, possibly. They're going to offer spirituality. And of course, the sheep on this planet are going to jump to it immediately. And it's even a possibility that this may involve the mark of the beast system, because according to all of these ancient astronaut theories that are being propagated around the world today, that we really come from these aliens. And so when they show up again, they're going to be offering humanity some kind of genetic upgrade that can get us in line with them, make us evolve more mentally and spiritually and physically. And it's going to merge together with the transhumanism project. It may merge together with this battle against infectious disease around the planet through DNA modification. And it is going to be quite the deception. And so you need to be on the lookout for that, and praying that the Lord will give you understanding and wisdom so that you don't fall into the deception. Notice what the professor says. They've been waiting for humanity to evolve and reach a stage where we will generally understand more about space and spaceships. There's an agreement between the U.S. government and the aliens. They signed a contract with us to do experiments here, and they too are researching and trying to understand the whole fabric of the universe, and they want us as helpers. Isn't that nice? There's an underground base in the depth of Mars where their representatives are, and also our American astronauts. He goes on to say, if I'd have come up with what I'm saying today 5 years ago, I would have been hospitalized. Wherever I've gone with this in academia, they've said the man has lost his mind. But today they're already talking differently. And I have nothing to lose. I've received my degrees and awards, and I'm respected in universities abroad where the trend is also changing. What he's saying is, just in the last 5 years alone, he's pointing to this shift in the consciousness of the planet. That 5 years ago, if he would have told people about this alien situation, they would have wanted to hospitalize him for mental illness, but not anymore, because we are almost ready to receive our space brothers and sisters. We just need a little bit more. The devil and the fallen angels have laid the trap, but they're not quite ready to spring it yet. There's a few more things that need to fall into place, and then mankind will be ready to receive his new God, the extraterrestrials. And then that's when things are going to get pretty wild. And so we'll discuss this more as time goes on, but it's definitely a very, very powerful, supernatural, end times delusion. And only those who have been filled with the Holy Spirit and are walking with the Lord are going to have the spiritual discernment to understand what's going on. So for today, we're going to look at the Matthew 13 account between the wheat and the tares, which I think is really a very interesting parable. It's got a lot of depth to it. Essentially, what we're dealing with here is that Jesus is giving parables about very interesting things that he says regard the foundation of the earth. He refers to them as secrets, going back to the beginning of creation. And so I think that that's a very relevant understanding. And then we know that he's going to tell the apostles this parable of the wheat and the tares, these two different species of plant that have been planted in the field, one from God and one from the enemy. And what we have to understand as the readers is that he's not talking about literal plants. He's using the analogy of the plants, but later in the text he makes it clear that he's talking about a literal seeds, literal people, two different species that are occupying on this planet. And so that's the context by which we need to keep in mind as we go through this parable. So verse 24, another parable he put forth, saying, the kingdom of heaven is like a man who sowed good seed in the field. But while men slept, his enemy came and he sowed the tares among the wheat, and then he went his way. So the kingdom of heaven is like a man who sowed good seed. The word seed is sperma. That's where we get the word sperm from. And obviously, we know what sperm is. That's used to impregnate a woman to create a future seed line. But while men slept, the enemy came and sowed the tares. That word is zizanian. We'll look at that word in a minute. It's got some interesting details that are worth looking at. Verse 26, when the grain had sprouted and produced a crop, then the tares also appeared. So the servants of the owner came and said, Sir, did you not sow good seed in your field? How then does it have tares? And he said to them, An enemy has done this. So the servants said to him, Do you want us to then go and gather up these tares? But he said, No, lest while you gather up the tares, you'll also uproot the wheat with them. But rather, let's let them both grow until the harvest. And at the time of the harvest, I will say to the reapers, First gather together the tares and bind them in bundles to be burned, but gather the wheat into my barn. So it's a pretty interesting parable. Just a few verses later, Jesus says, all these things Jesus spoke to the multitude in parables, and without a parable he didn't speak to them, that it might be fulfilled, which was spoken by the prophet, saying, I will open my mouth in parables, and I will utter things kept secret from the foundation of the world. That's a very important verse. Not only is Jesus fulfilling prophecy, because one of the Old Testament prophets said that the Messiah would come and speak about parables, but specifically the parables are about secrets from the foundation of the world. Now it's interesting, the definition of this word foundation. That word is ketabol. And it actually means the injection or depositing of the virile semen in the womb to impregnate. Now that's quite a definition. It can mean the literal impregnation of a woman or the seed of plants and animals in order to produce offspring. In fact, the word is used interchangeably with the word conceive, like we see in Hebrews 11:11. Through faith, also Sarah herself received strength to conceive a seed and was delivered of a child when she was past age, because she judged him faithful who had promised. The word conceive in this verse is the same as this word foundation up here. And so what we're seeing is that when Jesus says that I'm going to open my mouth in a parable and I'm going to utter things that have been kept secret since the foundation of the world, since the word foundation means the very beginning where there was an injection or depositing of virile semen in a womb, he's going back to the garden. That's what he's talking about here. He's talking about the garden event where the first virile semen was injected into a womb to create the seed of the woman and to create the seed of the serpent. So now that Jesus has told the parable to the multitudes, the disciples want to have greater understanding. So later in the chapter, verse 36, Jesus sent the multitude away, and he went into the house, and his disciples came to him, saying, Explain to us the parable of the tares of the field. So, obviously, they recognized that there was something unique about the parable. And obviously, Jesus didn't want the multitudes to have the understanding. And so, here, essentially, he's revealing it to the 12. But he's also revealing it to us because it's in the Bible, right? He's wanting us as well to know, so that those of us who have eyes to see can understand the full depths of what he's revealing to the 12. So they're asking him, what's going on with the parable of the tares? And he answers them and says, He who sowed the good seed is the Son of Man. So basically, Jesus is going to break down the parable and he's going to tell us what everything means within the parable. The one who sows the good seed is the Son of Man. Jesus is the Son of Man. Jesus is God in the flesh. So God is the one who sows the good seed. And the field is the world. That word is cosmos. The field is the world, that the good seeds are the sons of the kingdom, but the tares are the sons of the wicked one. So, we know that the good seeds come from God, and the bad seeds, known as the tares, come from the wicked one. In fact, it says they are the sons of the wicked one, meaning that the wicked one has sons. Well, how do you have sons? You have to spread your genetic progeny, like we just reviewed in the previous chapter. That the secret from the foundation of the earth, the word foundation means to inject virile semen into a womb. That's what the Nakash did in the garden. He injected his virile semen into the womb, and that led to the formation of a son. And that's what Jesus is describing here. Notice the sons of the wicked one. The word wicked one is poneros. That's where we get the word pornography from. It implies a filthy, disgusting sexuality to it. Verse 39, the enemy who sowed them is the devil. See that? The devil sowed that seed, the sperma, literally. That word devil is diabolos. It translates as the devil, Satan. And the harvest is the end of the age, and the reapers are the angels. Therefore, as the tares are gathered and burned in the fire, so will it be at the end of the age. The Son of Man will send out his angels, and they will gather out of his kingdom all things that offend and those who practice lawlessness, and they will cast them into the furnace of fire, where there will be wailing and gnashing of teeth. But then the righteous will shine forth as the sun in the kingdom of their Father. He who has ears to hear, let him hear. So Jesus has pretty much broke it down. We know that he's not talking about a literal field, and we know that he's not talking about literal plant species. He's using that as a parable to describe the two species of men that live on this planet. One that comes from God, that's the seed of the woman, described in the Proto-Evangelium. They can be traced directly from Adam and Eve. And then the other seed line, which comes from the wicked one, Satan, and they appear to be the derivatives of Cain and Tubal-Cain and all of that wicked seed line. And we know who we're dealing with in this parable, because in verse 39 it says that the enemy who sowed these seeds is the devil. We see that word being used in Revelation 12:9. And the great dragon was cast out, that old serpent, called the devil, there it is, and Satan, which deceiveth the whole world. He was cast out into the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. See that? The devil is that great dragon, that old serpent, that reptilian being who went into the garden. He's the one who sowed his sperma, his seed, in the garden. And it says that he's the devil and Satan. Now, in the New Testament, Satan is drakon. Comes from the word drake, which means dragon. Like we demonstrated in previous chapters regarding the mandrake plant. The mandrake plant was the plant used by drakon in the garden, the devil. That's why they call it the mandrake plant, because a man came into the garden, or what appeared to be a man, and he used the plant to put a spell on Eve. That's why they named it the mandragoria plant, after the man-dragon who used it. Now, Jesus tells us that he's going to let these two species grow up together, because in the process of trying to uproot one, you'll just hurt the other. And so they're going to coexist on the planet all the way to the end. And we're told that right here, because he makes it clear that in the analogy, in the parable, the harvest is the end of the age, and the reapers are the angels. This is right before the second coming, when Jesus comes back with his angels, with the shout of an archangel. The dead in Christ are raised, and the living, and the angels go around to the four corners of the earth, and they gather all of the righteous. So these two species, this seed of the woman, this seed of the serpent, they're going to coexist all the way to the last day. And then the Son of God, who has the ability to discern between the seed lines, is going to save the seed of the woman, and he's going to destroy the seed of the serpent. Now, the analogy, of course, the parable is the wheat and the tares. They look a lot alike. But there are some distinct differences between the two species. So when you go to the Middle East and you harvest the wheat and the tares, as they grow up together, it's very difficult to discern the difference. They look quite similar. But as time goes on, the wheat, as they produce the wheat, they get heavy. The branch starts to lean over, starts to become more yellow. And there's a very distinct difference between the tares and the wheat, as you can see demonstrated in these images. Here, all of these taller ones, the ones that don't bear fruit, so they don't get heavy, they just keep growing. You can clearly see that that's a weed and needs to be ripped out, while the rest of this is the wheat. It's also interesting here at the end of the harvest that there's a color change. Notice that these ones that are standing tall and proud and stiff-necked still remain green. Reptilian green, that is, because they're a serpent seed line. And even though they masquerade as humans, underneath the flesh is really fallen reptilian DNA. And we see that being represented by these big, tall, green tares that need to be ripped out. So Jesus is using two different species of plants to identify two different species of races living on the planet. One that comes from the Son of God, one that comes from Jesus, one that comes from Satan. They're going to grow up side by side. Most people want to spiritualize that, but what we've tried to demonstrate in previous lectures, and I feel that there's more than adequate evidence to substantiate this, that it's both spiritual, but it's also a literal prophecy. It's a literal rendition, that when Jesus says that they're going to grow up side by side, that he is talking about two literal species. The seed of the woman, like we see here with Moses, who's interacting with the seed of the serpent, like we see here in Pharaoh. And although Pharaoh on the surface looks like Moses in many ways, just like the wheat looks like, or the tares look like the wheat, nonetheless, there's two totally different genetic strains. Moses is made in the image of Adam and Eve, which God made in his own likeness. And Pharaoh is made more in the image of the fallen angels, who has a hybrid seed. But there is some human Adamite DNA in there, which allows him to hold human form and present himself as a human. But nonetheless, he has the fallen Nephilim reptilian DNA as well, which is really what's hiding underneath this flesh suit, is this reptilian hybrid entity. And that's why all of the outward manifestations have this serpent symbology, including the cobra hood and all of the symbols that they wear around their body. And if that's too big of a stretch for you, then let me remind you of last week's lecture, where the ancient grimoires in the pyramid texts describe the fact that the pharaohs are royal dynastic bloodline that trace back to the crocodile gods, the shape-shifting, half-human, half-crocodile hybrids, and that in fact when they did certain spells and witchcraft, the pharaoh became the living incarnation of those crocodile gods. That means that according to their legends and teachings, Pharaoh was able to shift in and out of reptilian form. Now, if this is true, which the evidence suggests that it is, then of course Jesus is aware of this. You know, when Jesus is dealing with the wicked, evil Pharisees, these men are so wicked that Jesus actually said that they're going to burn in hell. And that every time they bring in a new convert, they make them twice as bad as someone in hell. I mean, he really condemned them horribly. He called them a brood of vipers. He called them a generation of serpents. He made it very clear in his terminology who they were. And we know that the Proto-Evangelium says that the seed of the serpent is going to bruise the Messiah's heel. That means that the ones who crucified Jesus are part of the seed of the serpent. Well, who was responsible for the crucifixion? The Romans are the ones who did it, but who are responsible for it? It was the religious leaders of the Judaism system. The Pharisees and the Sadducees, they arranged all of it. They were the seed of the serpent. They were fulfilling the negative aspect of the Proto-Evangelium. On the surface, they appeared to be human, but underneath the surface, they were not fully human. They were one of these tares that Jesus is describing. And if you are going to masquerade as a human and try and have power on the planet, wouldn't you try and be in the upper ranks of society? So that's exactly what they did. They portrayed themselves as the religious leaders so that they could run the show. And Jesus saw through them without any difficulty, because he is the Son of God. He's the one who put the good seed in the field. He knows the difference between the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent. And so he showed up to call them out. And they knew this. They knew who he was. They knew that he was the promised one from the Proto-Evangelium. And they knew that that's a different seed line. And so it was in their blood and in their desire to destroy him. And that's why they planned the crucifixion. And of course, in doing so, they played right into God's hands, because they thought that they were killing the Messiah. And they thought by doing so that that was going to put them on top. But little did they know that that was the plan from the beginning. So God was an infinite amount of steps ahead of this serpent seed line. So let's take a minute and let's look at these weeds, also known as the tares. There is a very interesting pearl here that helps connect these tares to the Nephilim strain. So the word tare is a Zizanian, and the definition of a Zizanian is a bastard wheat. It resembles the true wheat, but it is a false grain. It doesn't produce any fruit at all. So these tares are going to grow up. They're going to look just like wheat. But when it comes to the harvest, they're never going to produce wheat. They do not produce good fruit. That's why Jesus makes all those analogies about a good tree bears good fruit and a bad tree bears bad fruit. And those analogies are always in reference to men. A good man, that is, a man who comes from the seed of the woman, they're going to honor God and do good in their life. Whereas the seed of the serpent, this reptilian hybrid seed, they're never going to bear any good fruit. They're going to always want to enslave the Adamites. They're always going to want to do wicked and evil because that's just in their blood. And so the idea that these weeds are called a bastard wheat, that's important because, as we've revealed in previous lectures, the word bastard is a very unusual word. In fact, the word bastard goes all the way back to the fallen angels and the women that they mated with. When they started having hybrids called Nephilim, that is the etymology of the word bastard. Those hybrids were called bastards because they were not true human beings. They were a hybridized species. And then over time, that word bastard got changed a little bit. Its original definition was in reference to the fallen angels and the human women making the Nephilim. Those Nephilim children were bastards. But then later, the word takes on a much broader connotation. It can also include children of incest, illegitimate children, or mongrels. Now, a mongrel is a mixed race. See, mixed population. That's the definition. And then later it became those born of a Jewish father and a heathen mother, or vice versa. So what happened is back in Genesis, when we start seeing the mixing of the fallen angels with the women, making the hybrids, the word bastard is born. And then later over the centuries, it took on a broader definition. But as you can see, even when you look at today's dictionary version of bastard, it means something that's no longer made in its original form. It's been debased. To debase something means to mix it, like metals, alloys. In fact, that's one of the synonyms. Alloys are a mixture of metals. It's no longer pure gold or pure silver. It's had copper and nickel and other alloys placed in it. Other synonyms for the word bastard are impure, hybrid, inferior, mongrel. And so over time, when a parent had a child outside of wedlock, that took on the connotation of a bastard child. Now, it's obvious where that came from. When these fallen angels took the wives, took the women, they didn't marry them in the way that we think of marriage today. When they took them by force. And they forced them to have sex to make these bastard children. So this idea of an angel and a human having a child out of the traditional wedlock of a man and a wife is where it comes from. And then later they just applied it to human relations. In other words, now in today's world, if a man and a wife have a baby outside of wedlock, they call that a bastard. But that's a bastardization of the word. The true bastards were the Nephilim. And that explains why when you go back in the Old Testament and you look at it through the proper lens, you see this. Like in Deuteronomy 23, a bastard shall not enter into the congregation of the Lord even to the 10th generation. Now, the way most people look at this is they're thinking, oh, this was some poor boy or girl who was born out of wedlock. Their mom and their dad didn't get married and they had a little bastard child. Wrong. You really think God would not allow that child to come into the congregation for 10 generations? 10 generations is a lot of generations. Even back then, the generational curse only went to the third and fourth generation. The sins of the mother and father were only passed down to the third and fourth generation. So I assure you, that is not the context by which this word is being used in this account. The way it's being used here is this serpent seed. If you as an Israelite, from the seed of the woman who could be traced back to the Adam and Eve, the original creation, if you went and lied with one of these Nephilim hybrid serpent seed lines, then your baby's going to be a true bastard. It's a mixture of the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent. It's not fully in the image of Adam and Eve. And that bastard child, that Nephilim strain, it's never going to be welcome into the congregation of the Lord. Not in the third or fourth generation, not in the seventh or eighth generation, even up to the 10th generation. Because that genetic strain is going to get passed down from all the way through each successive genealogy. We see the first time the word bastards being used is in the Ethiopian Book of Enoch. It's a very old book. That book was written before the Lord and the disciples came along. We see Jude in the New Testament prophesying about Enoch, that he prophesied that thousands upon thousands of the holy ones would come to judge all of the ungodliness in the last days. See, Enoch was a preacher of righteousness regarding prophecies of the last days. That's why the Book of Enoch has been recently recovered in the last 100 years. Now the words of the blessing of Enoch, wherewith he blessed the elect and the righteous, that's you and me, if you put your faith in Christ, who will be living in the day of tribulation. That's also you and I. When all the wicked and the ungodly are going to be removed. And he took up his parable and said, Enoch, a righteous man whose eyes were opened by God, saw the vision of the Holy One in the heavens, which the angel showed me, and from then I heard everything, and from then I understood as I saw, but not for his generation, but for a remote generation which is to come. So this book of Enoch, right away in the first chapter, is letting us know that Enoch is prophesying all of this book of Enoch was all meant for the final terminal generation living in the day of tribulation. And that adds up because we're living in that day, and now this information is materializing and becoming manifest to the sons of God, to the body of Christ. So in chapter 6, it came to pass when the sons of men had multiplied, that in those days were born unto them beautiful and comely daughters. See, they were beautiful, meaning that the angels wanted to have sex with them. They were attracted to them. And the angels, the sons of heaven, saw and lusted after them, and said, Come, let us choose us wives from among the children of men, and beget children. This wasn't an option. The fallen angels took the wives. Then their leader, Semyaza, said, I fear ye will not indeed agree to do this sin, and I alone shall have to pay the penalty. And they answered and said, Let us all swear by an oath. When you swore back then and made an oath, it couldn't be broken, especially if it's a blood oath, and all bind ourselves. To bind something usually means to bind it hand and foot and kill it and slaughter and let there be a blood oath. To bind ourselves by mutual imprecations not to abandon the plan. And they were in all 200 who descended in the days of Jared on the summit of Mount Hermon. And they called it Mount Hermon because they swore and made an oath. That's what Mount Hermon means. And all of the others together with him took wives, and each chose for himself one, and they began to go in unto them and defile themselves with him. That means having sex with them. And they taught them charms and enchantments. That's a big part of it. And the cutting of roots. We've looked at that as well. and made them acquainted with plants. This is all so that mankind will begin the process of transcendental meditation, occultism, mysticism, the pineal gland, the eye of Horus, and this communicates with the spirit realm. This allows the fallen angels to maintain close proximity and contact with the humans. And they became pregnant, and they bore giants whose height was 3,000 ells, and they consumed all the acquisitions of men. And when men could no longer sustain them, the giants turned against them and devoured mankind, cannibals. And they began to sin against the birds and the beasts and the reptiles and the fish. To sin against them means to have sex with them, bestiality, and devour one another's flesh and drink the blood. So not only were they sleeping with the animals, but they were eating their raw flesh and drinking their blood. This is where the idea of eating meat comes from. It was not part of God's original plan, but because this became so widespread during the flood, that after the flood, God allows Noah and the future mankind to have a concession and to begin eating meat, but they need to cook it and they're not to drink the blood that the life therein lives. So we see all of these different manifestations here at this point. Enoch 8. And Azazel taught men to make swords and knives and shields and breastplates for the purpose of war. Specifically the Kenites, Cain and his posterity, including Tubal-Cain, who is the inventor of edged weapons. And he made them known to them the metals of the earth and the art of working them, as well as bracelets and ornaments and jewelry. That's why we see the Naga serpent race and the crocodile race always wearing the gold and the jewelry, because this hybrid race were into the metals. And the beautifying of the eyelids and the costly stones and all the coloring tinctures to dye the hair and put on makeup and perfume to attract men to try and produce a very promiscuous society. And Semyaza taught enchantments, and the angels taught astrology and the constellations and the knowledge of the clouds and the signs of the earth and the sun and the course of the moon, so that mankind would be obsessed with worshiping pagan ideas like the sun and the moon and the stars and astrology and the zodiac, etc. And then Michael, Uriel, Raphael, and Gabriel, the good angels, looked down from heaven. They saw how much bloodshed was on the earth, and they said to one another, "The earth is made without inhabitant, cries the voice of their crying to the gates of heaven. And now to you, the holy ones of heaven, the souls of men, make their suit, saying, Bring our cause before the Most High." And they said to the Lord of ages, Lord of lords, God of gods, King of kings, the throne of thy glory unto all the generation of the ages, and thy name holy and glorious and blessed unto all ages. Thou seest what Azazel has done, who has taught all unrighteousness on earth and revealed the eternal secrets which were meant to be preserved in heaven, which men were striving to learn. And they've gone to the daughters of men, and they've slept with the women and defiled themselves and revealed to them all kinds of sin. And now the women have borne giants, and the whole earth has been filled with blood and unrighteousness. And then said the Most High God, the Holy and Great One, spoke and sent Uriel, the son of Lamech, Noah's father. And he said to them, Go to Noah and tell him, in my name, hide thyself, and reveal to him the end that is approaching, that the whole earth will be destroyed, and a great deluge is about to come upon the whole earth and destroy all that is on it. And now instruct him that he may escape, and his seed, the seed of the woman that leads to the Messiah, may be preserved for all generations of the world. And again, the Lord said to Raphael, Bind Azazel hand and foot, and cast him into outer darkness, and make an opening in the desert, which is Dudael, and cast him therein. That's exactly what Jude and 2 Peter also say. And place upon him rough and jagged rocks, and cover him with darkness, and let him abide there forever. And cover his face, so that he may not see light. And on the day of the great judgment, he'll be cast into the fire. Because Matthew 25 tells us, Then Jesus will say, Depart to me, those on the left, you cursed, into the everlasting fire prepared for the devils and the angels. The reason that God made hell in the first place is for these fallen angels and these Nephilim demons that were created as a consequence of this hybridization. That's the only reason God ever made hell. And here's the verse. Verse 8. And the whole earth has been corrupted by the works of Azazel. To him ascribe the bastards and the reprobates all sin. And to Gabriel said the Lord, proceed against the children of fornication. Very important. The children of fornication and the children of the watchers from amongst men. Send them one against the other, that they may destroy each other in battle, for the length of days shall they not have. So, these are now called the children of fornication, and these hybrid race are bastards and reprobates. That's very important. So once again, when Jesus starts to break down the parable of the wheat and the tares in Matthew 13, and then later he sends the multitude away, he takes the 12 over in a private scenario, and then he tells them that he's going to explain to them the foundations of the world. That's the Garden of Eden account he's talking about. The word foundation means to inject virile semen into a womb. When he talks about the seed of the woman and the two seed lines, the wheat and the tares, he's talking about the two seed lines in the proto-evangelium. That's why one of the definitions of the tare is a bastard wheat, because these bastard wheat are this Nephilim strain that goes all the way back to the fallen angels and the humans. And so Jesus knew that these two strains are going to live on this planet side by side. And this seed of the serpent are the ones who are always going to masquerade as human beings, and they're going to be the ones who occupy all of the different cultures. They're the ones who ran the nation of Babylon. They're the ones who ran the nation of Egypt. They're the ones who are running the world today. And the Lord recognized this, and he used very specific and very strong language to define them in his day when he called them generation of vipers. And we'll take a look at that a little bit more closely here in one of the next up-and-coming lectures. But understand that today they're going to present themselves as extraterrestrials. They know they can't present themselves as angels, so they've just come up with some new terminology. Now they've got their little spaceships and everything so they can fool humanity. But we're dealing with the same entities, just same playbook, but just a little bit of a different interpretation. And they're going to try and deceive the world through this extraterrestrial origin, when in reality, we're dealing with the same fallen angels and demons and the same bastard, reprobate, serpent seed line that's been around from the very beginning. And so that's enough for today. Hopefully you enjoyed that one. And we'll see you again soon. May the Lord be with you. May the Holy Spirit be with you. And on that note, Godspeed, and we'll see you on the next lecture.